For decades, fans saw Clint Walker and Jack Elam as total opposites, the tall, soft-spoken hero and the wild-eyed outlaw who always stole the scene. But when Clint Walker turned 90, he finally broke his silence about what really happened between them. What he revealed was nothing like the rugged cowboy friendship people imagined. It involved jealousy, betrayal, and a secret that followed both men long after the cameras stopped rolling. And once you hear what Clint said, you'll never look at their movies the same way again. Before Clint Walker ever became a television icon, he lived the kind of life that sounded like it was ripped straight from one of his Western scripts. Born Norman Eugene Walker in Hartford, Illinois, in 1927, he grew up during the Great Depression, tall, shy, and built like a man destined for hard work. Before Hollywood, he did it all: factory jobs, merchant marine duty during World War II, and even security work. There was nothing glamorous about his early years, but everything changed when his towering 6'6" frame and calm, steady voice caught the attention of a Warner Brothers talent scout. That discovery led to Cheyenne, the series that would define him forever. From 1955 to 1963, Walker played Cheyenne Bodie, the strong but gentle drifter who roamed the West settling conflicts with both his fists and his moral compass. The show made him one of television's first true cowboy superstars, right alongside James Arness and Lorne Greene. Viewers loved him for his natural charm and quiet authority, the kind of man who could handle but preferred to solve problems with reason. In an era full of loud heroes, Clint Walker stood out because he didn't have to shout to command a room. Yet fame didn't come without its battles. Walker was known to stand up for himself, especially when studio executives tried to push him around. He fought with Warner Brothers over pay and creative control, walking away from Cheyenne at the height of its success. Fans were stunned, but that decision earned him respect across Hollywood. He wasn't just a cowboy on screen, he was one off screen too, fighting for what he believed was right. After Cheyenne, Clint transitioned into film, starring in The Dirty Dozen and The Night of the Grizzly. That's where his path crossed with one of the most unusual faces in Western history, Jack Elam. On set, they were an odd pair. Walker, tall and stoic, was the definition of control. Elam, with his wild eye and unpredictable humor, brought chaos wherever he went. Their chemistry was electric, too good to be just acting, but as it turns out, the bond between them wasn't as simple as it looked, because behind those camera smiles and cowboy camaraderie, there was something else going on, something Clint Walker would only reveal decades later when he was old enough to finally stop caring about keeping Hollywood's secrets. Jack Elam was the kind of actor you could never forget, not because of his name, but because of that face, the wild, off-centered eye, the crooked grin, and the unpredictable energy that made him both hilarious and terrifying at the same time. Before he became one of Hollywood's most recognizable villains, Elam had lived a life that was anything but easy. Born in Arizona in 1920, he lost sight in his left eye after a childhood accident involving a pencil. But instead of letting it end his dreams, he turned it into his greatest weapon. That unmistakable stare became his calling card, helping him carve out a niche as the man every Western hero had to fear, or sometimes laugh at. Elam didn't begin in acting right away. He worked as a bookkeeper and even served as an auditor for film studios before making his big break into acting in the late 1940s. By the time the 1950s rolled around, he had become the go-to guy for playing outlaws, drunks, and unpredictable sidekicks. He had that rare mix of menace and charm, a man who looked like he could rob you blind, but might buy you a drink right after. When The Night of the Grizzly brought Clint Walker and Jack Elam together in 1966, audiences were in for something special. The contrast between them was cinematic gold. Walker, with his commanding calmness and square-jawed heroism, against Elam's wiry mischief and rough-edged humor. On screen they clicked instantly, the straight man and the troublemaker, a dynamic that seemed made for the big screen. But off-camera, things were more complicated. Crew members described the set as tense at times, mostly because of how different the two men were in real life. Walker was disciplined, quiet, and serious about his craft. Elam, on the other hand, lived by instinct, often joking, teasing, and stirring up chaos between takes. For some actors, that energy was infectious. For others, it was exhausting. And according to some who worked on the film, Clint Walker was not always amused. Still, something about their dynamic worked. Both men respected each other's skill, even if their personalities clashed. Over time, they would cross paths again in other Western projects and reunions, always playing up the hero versus rogue chemistry that made them fan favorites. Yet few people knew that beneath those friendly reunions, a deeper story was unfolding, one that would only come to light decades later, when Clint Walker himself finally opened up about it. Because what he revealed wasn't just a behind-the-scenes story, it was a confession about a bond built on respect, resentment, and one unforgettable incident that changed everything. In the golden age of Westerns, everyone wanted to believe that their favorite stars were just like their on-screen characters, loyal, fearless, and noble. But Hollywood, even back then, had its share of rivalries, and Clint Walker and Jack Elam were no exception. The two men came from completely different worlds. Walker was a perfectionist, a man who valued order and professionalism. Elam thrived on unpredictability, the kind of guy who might show up late, crack a joke at the wrong time, and somehow still steal the scene. The tension between them reportedly began during the night of the Grizzly. Walker, used to a disciplined set, was irritated by Elam's tendency to improvise lines or break into laughter during serious takes. While the audience saw their chemistry as natural, Walker saw it as chaos. Crew members recalled moments when Walker would quietly pull the director aside, asking for more control over the shoot. Elam, meanwhile, took it all in stride, sometimes intentionally pushing buttons just to get a reaction. Still, their rivalry wasn't built on hate. It was more complicated than that, almost like brothers constantly testing each other's limits. Walker respected Elam's raw talent, even if he didn't understand his methods. Elam, in turn, admired Walker's strength and discipline, but thought he took himself too seriously. Then came the whispers. Rumors began circulating that a particular incident on set had caused a permanent rift between them. Some said Elam embarrassed Walker during filming by mocking his serious demeanor in front of the crew. Others claimed Walker confronted Elam privately, and the two nearly came to blows. There was never any public confirmation, but decades later, when Walker spoke about Elam, his words hinted that there was more truth to those rumors than anyone realized. Because even though the two continued to cross paths at Western conventions and interviews, there was always something slightly tense in Walker's tone whenever Elam's name came up. He never outright criticized him, but his praise always came with an asterisk, as if he respected Elam but couldn't quite forgive him. And that silent, lingering tension between them would remain hidden for years until Clint Walker, in his 90s, decided he was finally ready to tell the truth about what really happened between him and Jack Elam. By the time Clint Walker turned 90, he had already become one of the last surviving giants of television's golden Western era. He had seen the industry rise, change, and forget many of the men who built it. He had outlived directors, co-stars, and the studios that once made him a household name. But old age has a way of making people reflect differently, and Clint was no exception. In one of his final interviews, given only a few years before his passing, Clint spoke about things he had never dared to touch before. Stories from his early years in Hollywood, friendships that fell apart, and memories that had haunted him longer than he cared to admit. When the interviewer mentioned Jack Elam's name, something in Clint's expression shifted. His usual composed manner softened, as if he was weighing whether or not to finally tell a truth he'd been holding back for decades. He said slowly, "Jack was one of a kind. You never knew what he'd say next, or what kind of day you'd get with him, but he had something special, something you couldn't teach." There was a pause, the kind of pause that feels heavier than words. Then Clint continued, "But Jack and I, We didn't part ways the right way. And that's something that still bothers me, according to people close to him. That statement referred to an incident on the set of The Night of the Grizzly. Multiple crew members had recalled that tension ran high near the end of filming. Clint, known for his disciplined professionalism, reportedly felt undermined after Elam made a cutting remark during a heated moment on set. Some said it was a joke gone too far, one that embarrassed Clint in front of the cast and crew. Others whispered that it was something deeper, that Elam had repeated a personal story about Walker off camera, something meant to stay private. Whatever it was, the two men barely spoke afterward. Clint finished the film, did his scenes, and left. When he was asked about Elam in later years, he'd always offer polite, brief answers. Never cold, but never warm either. That restraint spoke volumes. For a man as private as Clint Walker, silence was rarely empty. When Jack Elam passed away in 2003, fans noticed that Clint didn't attend the funeral. At the time, most assumed it was due to distance or health. But years later, Clint confessed in that same interview, "Some things you keep between men. Not everything needs an audience." Those words broke through the myth of the perfect Hollywood friendship. It wasn't about hatred or revenge. It was about pride, regret, and the things men of their generation never learned how to say out loud. Clint admitted that both he and Jack were too proud to reconcile. He said, "I think we both thought we had more time. That's the biggest mistake we make." Hearing that from a man who built his life on stoicism hit fans hard. For decades, he had played heroes who always made things right before the credits rolled. But real life didn't come with a script or a second take. Walker's confession revealed that even heroes carry unfinished business, and that even cowboys have ghosts. But what made his words linger wasn't just the sadness. It was the respect. He never spoke ill of Jack. He never assigned blame. He simply admitted that their friendship, like many in Hollywood, was complicated, and that sometimes what looks like loyalty on camera hides quiet heartbreak behind it. When word of Clint's revelation spread, it rippled through the Western fan community like wildfire. On social media and fan forums, people began revisiting The Night of the Grizzly frame by frame, searching for signs of tension they might have missed before. They dissected every exchange, every glance, and every smirk that now seemed layered with unspoken meaning. Suddenly, that movie wasn't just another Western. It was a glimpse into a real-life story of pride and unhealed wounds. Some fans defended Jack Elam, arguing that his wild humor and pranks were part of his charm, that maybe Clint had just taken things too seriously. Others sided with Walker, saying that his calm and professionalism deserved more respect than Elam's antics sometimes showed. The debate reignited old Hollywood discussions about method acting versus discipline, spontaneity versus control. Two men with two different codes, one structured like a soldier, the other ruled by impulse. Film historians began re-examining their collaborations, noting how much of the Walker-Elam dynamic mirrored the Western archetype itself: the lawman and the outlaw, order and chaos, dignity and mischief. That contrast had always been the magic behind their chemistry, but now it felt real, not just performance. And beyond the speculation, something deeper began to emerge. Fans saw Clint Walker's honesty as rare, especially in a Hollywood that still thrives on polished legacies and controlled narratives. His willingness to speak about regret, even decades later, made him more human than ever. In an industry that rewards vanity, he showed vulnerability. For many, that final revelation reshaped Clint Walker's legacy. He wasn't just the tall, unbreakable cowboy anymore. He was a man who lived with the same regrets and doubts as anyone else. A man who carried loyalty so seriously that betrayal, even decades later, still stung. Meanwhile, Jack Elam's legend also grew. His chaotic humor, once seen as just comedic relief, took on a bittersweet tone. People began to appreciate him as more than the crazy-eyed villain. They saw him as a performer who covered his insecurities with laughter, a man who turned a physical imperfection into a weapon of charisma. but who may have struggled behind that grin. Clint's story sparked new documentaries, blog posts, and tribute videos exploring their working relationship. Younger audiences who had never watched Cheyenne or The Night of the Grizzly suddenly discovered both actors for the first time, not through film studios, but through fan discussions online. It was ironic, really, that a moment of truth spoken at 90 ended up making two forgotten stars relevant again in the digital age. In a sense, Clint Walker's confession became one last act of storytelling, not scripted, not rehearsed, but real. And just like in his westerns, the truth rode in quietly, late, and with the kind of impact only honesty can have. But that wasn't the end of it, because what his confession really exposed wasn't just the story of two actors. It was the story of an entire generation of Hollywood men who learned too late that silence doesn't heal anything. Today, when people look back at the golden era of westerns, they tend to remember the scenery, the dusty landscapes, the gunfights, the stoic heroes riding into sunsets. But the story of Clint Walker and Jack Elam reminds us that what happened off camera was often just as dramatic as what happened on it. It's a story about pride, friendship, and the quiet cost of fame, and how even legends can be haunted by the things they never said. Walker's late-life honesty offers a glimpse into something audiences rarely get to see: the emotional aftermath of being a public myth. For decades, he was typecast as the perfect man, calm, decent, brave. But what he revealed in his 90s was vulnerability. It was humility. It was the side of the cowboy that doesn't draw a gun, but lowers his head and admits, "I wish I'd done it differently." Jack Elam's part in that story is equally human. Beneath his eccentric humor and unpredictable behavior was a man who survived loss, overcame disability, and turned pain into performance. His laughter, now viewed through the lens of Clint's confession, feels almost tragic, like a man who joked because he couldn't quite say what he really felt. Together, their story shows how opposites can attract, collide, and leave marks on each other that last a lifetime. Clint and Jack never made peace in person, but in a strange way, Walker's revelation completed their story. It gave fans closure, the kind of ending their films rarely allowed, and maybe that's why people still talk about it. In an era of quick fame and forgotten stars, their story endures because it feels real. It strips away the fantasy and reminds us that the people who played our heroes were just as fragile as anyone else. Clint Walker's truth at 90 wasn't just about a feud. It was about redemption. It was about learning that saying something too late is still better than never saying it at all. It was about how even the strongest men sometimes wish they could turn back time, just to make one more phone call or say one more honest word. Today, their old films continue to air: The Night of the Grizzly, Cheyenne, and countless others. But those who watch closely will notice it now: the tension behind the smiles, the depth behind the eyes. Every look between them carries meaning. Every shared line feels heavier, because now we know what those silences were hiding. And that is the true legacy Clint Walker left behind. Not just as the hero who always rode off into the sunset, but as the man who finally admitted that real life doesn't always end that cleanly. Sometimes, it leaves you looking back and realizing that the hardest battles are the ones you fight with yourself. At 90, Clint Walker didn't just reveal a secret. He revealed a truth that many Hollywood stars take to their graves. Behind the fame, the cowboy hats, and the silver screens were men who carried pride, regret, and unspoken memories that outlived their careers. His confession about Jack Elam wasn't about blame, it was about closure. And maybe that's what makes this story so haunting. It reminds us that even in the make-believe world of westerns, real emotions can't be scripted. Every smirk, every glare, every line of dialogue between Clint Walker and Jack Elam now feels heavier, like echoes of something too real to be just acting. So the next time you see them together on screen, remember, you're not just watching two actors, you're watching two men who lived, clashed, and carried a story they never fully told until the end. And for Clint Walker, that truth finally spoken at 90, was the last frontier he ever had to cross.